objective: recover the gun turret of the USS Monitor. The challenges are enormous and time is running out. From a barge the size of a football field, divers descend 240 feet below the surface into an undersea world known for its wicked currents and sometimes near zero visibility. They struggle against underwater pressure 8 times greater than at the surface to free the turret from the ship's deck, armor belt, and debris pinning her to the ocean floor. On the surface, archaeologists, historians, and engineers watch with bated breath to see if recovery techniques developed through years of planning and fierce debate succeed or fail. The stakes couldn't be higher, and everyone on the team knows it. Their only hope, teamwork, pooling their passion and problem solving, muscle and know-how.
Okay, so we could probably bust through and put some tool.
And doing it as fast and as carefully as they can. And just as they near the goal line, 2 monster storms appear on the horizon. It's a race to save the turret. New Year's Eve, 1862. In a sudden and violent storm, a red lantern blinks its last warning. The USS Monitor sinks below the dark waves. Her turret flips upside down on the ocean floor, and the remainder of the ship topples over it. There she will stay, her exact location unknown, for over a century. Her rest is far from peaceful. The Gulf Stream and Labrador Current rip across her, and the salts of the deep eat away at her iron. By the time she's found, some of her decking is as brittle as a soda cracker. Her rapid decay spurs NOAA archaeologists, Navy divers, and Mariners Museum curators to rescue and conserve her major artifacts. The final challenge, to recover the most priceless Monitor treasure. Welcome to the Turret Recovery Theater, where you'll join in the race to save the Monitor's turret. I'm your host, Sam Waterston. 4 steps precede the turret's lift: getting at the turret, excavating, deploying the spider, supporting the roof. You'll get a chance to vote on some of the choices facing the recovery team using the buttons on your armrest. The expedition faces immense challenges in this place called the graveyard of the Atlantic. Currents can be fierce or non-existent. Visibility can vary from hour to hour, and storms can blow up in an afternoon. It is a challenge divers thrive on.
As a Navy salvor, the epitome of a salvage job is deep, dark, and dangerous, and the Monitor had all 3 of them.
Divers descend 240 feet to work on the wreck site, breathing a compressed mixture of helium and oxygen. Some are surface divers, also called sprint divers, because their time on the bottom is 30 or 35 minutes tops.
Very little time to get anything done. Everything had to be choreographed.
Other divers are saturation divers who stay in compression on the bottom and on the barge for 10 days at a time.
Saturation divers would go down and dive a minimum of 4 hours and as long as 6 hours a day and dive every day. So it's extremely efficient.
Working underwater is nothing like working on land.
You tend to float and be a lot more buoyant. So it's hard to use your body in leverage type situations. So for instance, a simple thing like grabbing a wrench and pulling on the wrench and loosening a nut on the bottom, that force, just doing that, may flip you all the way up and over the wrench.
And then of course there's the helium, which makes divers sound like the chipmunks.
Well, there's nothing like getting frustrated or getting angry down there, and you're trying to chew somebody out topside, and you already sound like Mickey Mouse, and now you just sound like a babbling idiot. Nothing, you can't understand a word you say.
By far the biggest challenge is to balance the priorities of Navy divers to get as many tons on deck as fast and as safely as possible, and those of NOAA archaeologists and historians to protect a national treasure while carefully mapping and saving artifacts. With a shortage of time and money and the inevitable unexpecteds will test everyone's patience. It's June 26, 2002. The rescue begins now. We're on the barge Wotan. Bad weather slows the start of the expedition, but now divers are grappling with the first big task, to remove the armor belt and decking that lie on top of the turret. The armor belt weighs about a ton per running foot. It's 5 feet tall, made of pine and oak, spiked and plated with iron, and hardened underwater for 140 years. Divers have to figure out a way to remove it without damaging the turret beneath. The armor belt doesn't just look intimidating.
The armor belt was in good condition. First off, it didn't take a brain surgeon or archaeologist to figure it out. It's supporting the entire wreck.
She did exactly what she was designed to do, and that was prevent things from penetrating her, divers and all their tools and equipment.
A sample cut in the armor belt made the year before convinced team members that they could make 2 cuts and lift the center portion away. All agreed this would be safest for the turret, but divers are finding the armor belt extremely tough. Here's where you get to put your 2 cents in. Do you think they should make 2 cuts as planned, or finish that single cut and use the barge's crane to lift the belt away? Vote now. Green for 2 cuts, red for 1 cut. If you voted red, you chose right. The armor belt proved to be a lot harder to separate than the team ever imagined.
We had underwater chainsaws, we had hydro lances, we had underwater cutting and welding equipment standing by. We even had a design where we used chain and or wire and saw back and forth using winches on deck. That's very effective in cutting just about anything.
But the armor belt's wood and iron resist day after day. The crew decides to use the barge's crane to help bend and break the belt.
We decided that the ship had more than ample capability, the barge, to raise that entire section and move it all at once, which would mean we just had to do the single cut.
5 days of constant work finally separates the belt.
She was very, very stubborn. All in all, we got through her. Once we got through the armor belt, we needed to remove it, and that was the next oh whoa.
So our fear was that any sideways stress or any undue stress other than straight down on the turret would cause the whole structure to give way and collapse into pieces.
When we went to go lift this, we tried as much as we can to use wood and timbers and things like that to protect her from that damage when we picked it up. And she did just that. When we went to pick up the armor belt, she drove right into the turret in one spot that we couldn't protect her, of course.
When we lifted the armor belt, we didn't want the armor belt to pound the turret into oblivion. So yeah, it kissed it, but once we were able to get back in there and look at it, it knocked some concretion off, but it didn't damage anything.
That really did increase our confidence because it was a pretty good spec.
Once the armor belt and decking are lifted away, we can see the Monitor's turret for the first time, full to the brim with coral and coal and silt and artifacts. Divers must remove tons of that material, bit by bit, so the turret will be light enough to lift. They must carefully map and document each artifact. The process is slow, painstaking, and full of surprises. Divers set up eductor systems, like giant vacuum cleaners, to help them suck out the turret's contents.
If you can imagine taking a Hoover vacuum cleaner into a large living room and it's filled with dirt, and vacuuming from the dirt starting at the top of the ceiling all the way down to the floor, except that every one of those bags that you take out of the vacuum cleaner has to be hand sifted.
So the guy held a dredge and just fanned sediment up into it, and that's why it took so long.
But soon the silt gives way to concreted sediment and coal, and the pace of excavation slows.
We started running into a lot of coal. It was concreted together, and again, we couldn't use, we were afraid to take our magic wand, the 20,000 PSI hydroblaster at that point, so the divers really had to kind of pick through there piece by piece.
As artifacts come to light, they must be mapped and carefully removed, a slowdown that eats away at the clock. Here's where you get to make the choice. Should the divers continue to excavate the turret, or leave the remaining contents undisturbed? Press green to continue excavating. Press red to stop excavating and go ahead with the lift. If you pressed green, you made the same decision as the team, to keep excavating so the crane can handle the turret's weight.
Captain Murray asked me one time, and we were working on artifacts down inside the wreck. He goes, "Well, what do you want? You want the artifacts? You want your turret?" I went, "Yes," because that's what we're there for.
Talking like Donald Duck up to trying to talk a little sense into, realize we need to document as best we can, but we also have to realize that we have some limited time, so there needs to be some compromise.
The first surprise comes 4 days into the excavation phase.
And when he realized, well, this is pretty smooth for a clump of coal, it was one of the Dahlgren guns. We were pretty excited about that.
What we knew we were going to have to do was excavate far enough into the turret to where we could, get some straps around the cannons and carriages.
With less than a week and a half of time left, the divers find the biggest surprise of all, the remains of one of the Monitor's crewmen.
And he pointed to it, and my light was much brighter than his, and the camera's resolution much better. But as soon as my light shined on the object that he was pointing to, I knew right away that it was bone, and that we had found one of the heroes from the Monitor.
It triggered for the archaeologists and the Navy divers a whole change in attitude and approach to the excavation.
They were sailors just like we were, and being able to find out what happened, in this case to two of those sailors, and bring them home had far more significance to us than we realized ahead of time.
As saturation divers excavate inside the turret, sprint divers are clearing away debris outside. They're preparing to land an ingenious lifting device that will enfold the turret and support heavy items like the cannon inside it. It's called the Spider. 26 tons of steel, 15 feet tall. With legs splayed out, there's just 16 inches of clearance between the turret and the Spider. Deploying it will require great weather, glassy seas, minimal current, perfect timing, and luck. Under the wreck, silt and debris lay about 3 feet up on one side of the turret. The original plan was to sweep it away before deploying the Spider. That's easier said than done.
We had to get the Spider legs down so that the little lifting feet could get underneath the lower edge of the turret.
There were some pieces of debris that were lodged under the turret and just couldn't be removed.
Coal, concretion, rock, metal in some cases. Some of the deck plating had fallen off and was underneath.
And so we finally reached the point where the divers had reported they thought things were cleared away enough that the legs of the Spider could all be fitted into position, and we all agreed, let's give that a try.
So now it's your turn. The waves lift the barge, crane, and Spider up and down. The current moves the Spider side to side. Watch the screen and push your green button when you think it's time to deploy the Spider. If your armrest buttons are flashing, you came closest to putting the spider squarely atop the turret. Stand up and take a bow. What really happens? Divers and cameras arrayed around the turret tell the master diver what they see, and he instructs the crane operator when to lower the spider.
I made the call to go ahead and come down on the hook. And they came down on the hook, and one of the spider legs nicked the wall of the turret. Well, you just thought I shot the president. The whole barge was...
Jetting the spider's legs in turns out to be far more difficult than anyone expected.
All 8 legs hit a metal stanchion.
It became extremely time-consuming and difficult.
We ended up measuring progress in increments of an inch per day.
Time is running out. It's time to call for help.
That was our job. That was the sprint divers. That was our baby, and we just could not get through it.
On one night shift, a single saturation diver finishes jetting the remaining legs into place.
At that time, we were using 2 8-inch air reductors. We also had 2 4-inch water reductors, underwater cutting rig. We had a hydro lance, chain falls, and wire straps, and all kinds of things on the bottom. Anything that we could come up with, we were employing against these legs. Well, at one point on the dive, Vern used all of them at the same time.
The weakest part of the turret is its roof. At this point, its floor. Never designed to bear weight, it carries a heavy burden of silt and artifacts. How much support is enough? Well, the debate continues right up until the day of the lift. Everybody has a dog in this fight. Add to that the difficulty in placing the turret and spider on top of the lifting platform, fitted with stabbing guides that some fear will pierce the turret's roof in the lively sea. Designing a platform to support the turret touched off a heated debate long before the expedition began.
And I passed over a note to Jeff, saying Jeff asked me how far below the turret the platform's going to be. The platform was going to be 6 feet below the turret. If it fell at the turret, it was going to be scattered from here to Iceland. And the whole meeting just blew up.
Kelly then figured out a way to attach the platform closer to the turret roof.
After that meeting, we came up with the stabbing guides. Different heights, they get the cups on one stabbing guide, manipulate the turret around to get the shorter stabbing guides in, land it, pad eyes all line up, easy day, time to go home. This is going to work.
As time runs out and divers investigate, the question arises, does the turret roof need even more support? What do you think? If you think the roof needs more support, push the green button. If you think the support platform is enough, push the red button. Well, it's still a matter of some dispute among team members. But for one person on the team, there is no question.
Everybody got together and went around the table, and everybody was asking if we're ready to lift, and everybody was going, yes, yes, yes. And John turned to me and he goes, what do you think? Are we ready to lift? And I had to say no. I couldn't convince myself that we had done everything within our realm of possibility to secure the roof.
I was ready to crawl out of that hole. I was ready to just open up the door. I said, hey, screw decompression. I want to strangle these guys.
Jeff didn't want his baby being moved, so he said it was ready to be moved.
After I calmed the master divers down so that they didn't throw Jeff overboard, we just said, okay, if that's what we need to do, let's all start thinking of how we can do that.
We made these J-hooks that went around the outside of it with cable straps, and they hooked on the top, and they hooked, but they had enough of a hook underneath where the claw legs or the spider legs just supported the radius of the turret. What the J-hooks did was they went in past the armor thickness, and we were able to cinch them up.
At the same time, another big decision is reached: to swing the barge around so it can protect the lift area as much as possible from rough seas.
The tug crew thought they could do it, and they worked through the night in some of the worst conditions I've ever seen a mooring operation, conducted in. and got the barge turned, got the anchors reset, and like I said, in best conditions, it should have been taken a day, and it took them about 8 hours.
Now it's time to decide. Can the lift begin? Dawn, August 5th. Bottom currents are ripping. Topside weather looks okay, but storms are clearly on the horizon.
We're out of time, we're out of money, we're out of weather windows. Something was going to have to happen. Either we were pulling chalks and the mission was a failure, and you had to beat your way through about 80 or so angry, ornery, smelly divers to let that happen.
I felt like that entire decision was on my shoulders.
She will take it one step at a time. First, deploy the rig that attaches the spider to the crane.
And he got to the bottom and it turned into a rat's nest.
I hope he's good at puzzles. Yeah, I was going to say that. Had a little game with the strings.
A saturation diver struggles against the current to untangle the straps and secure the 100-pound shackles to the spider.
He would grab one of the slings and then he'd float it out there in the current, and the current would actually start to pull that sling, and all he pretty much had to do was just guide it.
Then the next step, lift the spider and turret over to the platform.
And I remember the silt lifting cloud coming up off the bottom as she broke suction. The diver saying, "Turret's off the bottom," and it appears to be undamaged. The roof held.
The diver was literally down there on his own trying to help guide this huge maybe 150-ton mass onto the stabbing guides, and for us on the surface who could do nothing but watch and agonize, the agony was pretty severe.
It was surging up and down a good 10 feet, and those stabbing guys just looked like they were going to poke a hole in it at any time.
Just about the time we seated the first stabbing guide, my diver's umbilical slack broke free and went under the turret. That's the tightest my backside's been as a Navy diver, was watching this sledgehammer go up and down on the steel chopping block, and my diver at 240 feet was umbilical stuck underneath it.
The divers quickly move the hoses out of the way. Then, as they pull on the 210-ton turret, the spider's receptor ring drops over the second stabbing guide. It seems like a miracle to the recovery team, but the barge crew, accustomed to outfitting oil rigs in the Gulf, is not surprised.
They never really saw it as being as complex and difficult as we did. Jeff and I kept asking, "Well, you sure about this? You sure about that?" And the crane operator came over and he sort of embraced Jeff and me and said, "Boys, it's going to be okay. I'm going to take care of your turret." And he did.
Bubba, the crane operator, Bubba's the man. Bub did it. He nudged her up, and when she actually came over, it was almost like, best way to describe it would be that Neptune finally bowed down a little bit, and he said, "Okay, you guys won."
The first thing you saw coming out of the water was the Stars and Stripes, which was pretty significant and pretty emotional.
The race is over and victory is sweet. But there's not a single member of that team who doesn't yearn to go back and do it all over again.
Everyone really got into it. It's something we just had to do and do it right. So it made things very tense because everybody really cared. And by the same token, that may very well be why it was successful.